Um, and welcome everybody to this, what was going to be a workshop meeting and is now a special meeting. And the only difference there, the distinction is that we have one policy matter that we have to take care of at the end of the workshop session portion of the meeting. So because it's there's some action that needs to be taken, we have to treat it as a regular meeting rather than a workshop. So that having been said, again, welcome everybody. Can we have a roll call? Pam.
Council members Beck.
Here.
Grambley.
Here.
Laitkin.
Here.
Schuyler.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Meyer.
Here.
Mayor Clark.
Here. Thank you. So again, because this is a special meeting as opposed to a workshop, we have our typical time for public comments established for the public to address the council for something that's not otherwise listed on the agenda. I would just add tonight, and I plan to do this at every beginning of every meeting from now on, just since we've had some sort of relatively elevated emotions at some recent meetings. I'd just like to remind everybody that we are a very respectful community here in Ridgway. We treat each other with respect, and I would just ask that everyone who speaks tonight, including council, continue that tradition of speaking with calm and respect, even if you have strong feelings about whatever it is you're talking about. It's important to keep everybody calm in order for our emotions to keep from getting in the way of actually listening, right? So with that said, is there anyone who has any public comments about anything that's not otherwise on the agenda?
See, Robin's got her hand raised.
Robin.
Hi, Mayor Clark. Thanks for those words. I really appreciate that. And I will do my best to model that. I'm here not related to water at all. I just wanted to share some thoughts, mostly because I missed the last meeting and I read about the Riverfront Village, or otherwise known as Alpine Home Ridgway, in the newspaper. So first I want to thank the council and the staff for working so hard to achieve some opportunities for attainable housing for workforce in Uray County, and particularly the partnerships you've developed with the Space to Create and the Yellow Brick Road development, as well as the policies related to deed restrictions. I was a little aghast when I read the newspaper article, and I keep hoping that it was a typo that said that the 735 square foot single bedroom units were going to be over $500,000, because the larger units were actually in the $400,000 range. So if it's possible, I mean, it's possible that maybe I have bad information from the paper, but regardless, I'd love to just share my comments anyway and then be corrected if in fact the newspaper made an error. I feel like our developers perhaps can do better, and I would love the council to hold them to a higher standard. I feel like they are probably, they wouldn't be doing business if they weren't making a decent profit. And so a couple of thoughts I have is that if we could encourage the developers perhaps to even raise the cost of some of the other units so that the deed restricted units could be more attainable for our teachers and police officers and baristas and wait staff. I mean, all those folks, right? And another option perhaps is, which won't increase their profit, but might make it better for the attainable housing, would be to increase that 10% deed restricted to something closer to 20%, so that we're looking at 1 out of 5 units rather than 1 out of 10 could be deed restricted. I know that that puts a burden on the developers. I guess I'm just trying, this is not my wheelhouse at all, so I'm just a citizen who cares about the folks that keep our community running. And I've said here in the HOA where I live, when we were having some discussions around permitting or not permitting ADUs, and I feel like we have a community that really values, restaurants and coffee shops and bookstores and outdoor gear establishments. I mean, all those kind of things. And certainly we treasure our teachers. Beth, thank you so much. And I asked them, so who's going to serve your latte? Who is going to deposit your check? Who is going to sell you X, Y, or Z? And it's a incredibly difficult situation, and I just appreciate everything you're trying to do. But when I read that, I was just kind of blown away. And I did do a little research about townhomes. I got to move my screen here a little bit. And I think it's current information that said for the state of Colorado, a 750 square foot, townhome was in the range of 80 to 102,000. And I figure, we're in the mountains, I'd even give it 3 times that amount. So even if we could keep a 1-bedroom deed restricted house, townhome to like 300,000. And then I also read the document in your packet that talked about the developer, not increasing the price more than 10% of the cost to build it and no lower than 3%. And I guess I would just say, again, if we can get those developers to go to the 3% profit end of that margin, that would maybe make it a little easier for folks who are trying to survive here in the county. I just don't want us to become a community of, I guess, what I represent, right? Old, white-haired, retired folks, and I worked hard, right? And could never have afforded the home we live in if it weren't that we had 2 incomes. Certainly on a teacher's salary, it would be unattainable. So it's just my thoughts. And again, just appreciate what you can do with that development or going forward, so that we can have a community that's diverse.
Thanks, Robin.
Thank you.
I think the main thing I can say is that every one of us on council empathizes with your concerns 100%. And I think we were all just as disturbed by those numbers as you were, and I think they're correct. I don't recall the actual precise numbers, but the world's
got a problem.
The world's been turned on its head in so many ways. Cost of construction is just blown through the roof. Supply chain issues. I'm not making excuses, and I agree with you. We need to do a lot more. And all I can do is pledge that we will keep working on it. One good thing that came out of that discussion at that meeting was that the developer actually committed to helping seed a down payment assistant fund, and that's already in the works through Home Trust of Uray County. Since our meeting, we've had a couple meetings with Andrea Sokolowski of the Home Trust, and Joel has met with her, the developer, and a fund's been set up, and he's gonna seed it, I believe with $50,000, and then he's gonna help try to sort of beat the bushes to get more, because I think that anything we can do to help people get into these homes that are ridiculously expensive, even for a deed restricted unit, we have to be doing, and I will commit to continue to do that. And all I can tell you is that we're all talking about this, and we're all trying to find ways to address some of these concerns. You mentioned the 10% number versus 20%. We don't have what they call a inclusionary zoning number on the book. So the 10% is something that was negotiated. And we've, over the years, the town of Ridgway has taken the stance that not having a hard number like 10% enables us to potentially negotiate more. We haven't been able to do that yet, but again, there's a lot of work to do, and it's a incredibly troubling situation all over the country, not just in Ridgway.
Yeah.
I know those are kind of hollow words in some ways, but anybody want to add anything to that?
Yeah, John, can I
Go ahead, Terry.
Go ahead, Terry.
just to address two of the other points Robin brought up, the discrepancy on the square footage, the smaller square footage being more expensive than the 2-bedroom, I think was because of the fact, and I may have this wrong, that it was located on the ground floor versus the upper floor, and the ground floor is more expensive to build on, probably foundation costs or something like that. I may have that backwards, but I think that was part of the discrepancy.
Or something like that.
Parking
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah, the other thing was that those units were limited to a 3% over cost profits, which was the minimum negotiated profit in their contract. So they are doing what they can based on what John said on the building costs to come in as best they can based on their current projection of costs, and they are limiting the profit on the deed restricted units to less than a third of what it is on the other units.
That's great to hear. Thank you
Robin.
so much, Terry.
And Robin, I would invite you to watch that section of the meeting on YouTube. A lot of your concerns were addressed by one of us or another during that meeting. I would be more than happy to tell you about how I impassionedly explained what teachers make relative to the AMI we were talking about.
Yeah.
And if we start, the other problem is if we start asking for 20% deed restricted units, people are going to push closer to that 10% profit number because we're then taking away the at cost units. So it's that really careful balance. I think I've been frustrated by that 3% number a few times in the last, year, where we were offered units and said, here's a deed restricted unit, but it's not affordable. But anyway, I would invite you to take a look at that. A lot of your concerns were addressed.
And I'm actually wondering if there is, I have no idea the legalities, what the town policy is and whatnot, but in my ideal world, I would be in, if that's going to be the cost of the deed restricted, I would rather we not have a new PUD, right? I would rather we just don't build more houses if they're going to just be occupied by wealthy people who can
Well,
afford to live here.
Of course, in the United States, that's not an option. We can't just
Okay.
they can't build on their property.
Yeah.
That'd be a huge lawsuit, and the town would suffer
I figured
more
so.
from the lawsuit. I mean, people who own property have a right to build on it, and that can be a tough thing to deal with when we see lots of growth like we're seeing. But the conversation continues. I think we need to all stay involved and do what we can to push the envelope.
And the only other thing, Mayor Clark, I'd love to say, in all due respect to the developer, and I appreciate that commitment to the down payment fund, but I also know that given the profits they're going to make on this, 50,000 is not that significant, right? And so I just keep wanting to encourage the people who are making a lot of profit on development in this community to give back in whatever way they can. And that's a chunk of cash, right? But I think about things like, Peabody Coal building a new school. That's a huge investment, right, in a community, but they're making billions of profits. So it's all that relativity.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time. We're going to.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks so much, all of you.
I see two. I think Jennifer Cram had her hand up. Andrea was going to weigh in. Jennifer, were you going to weigh in on this topic, or do you have a separate topic?
No, I was going to weigh in on this topic if I
Go
can
ahead.
briefly. I wanted to say I agree with Robin. I read the same thing in the paper and didn't understand it, and I think you've explained it a bit. I wanted to say that, like with Lena Street Commons, we ran into a problem there with the deed restricted. As you guys all know, that it got
Same issue. Yeah.
they ended up putting them in one building at the end, which wasn't which wasn't ideal, but they ended up doing that. And the price there for the deed restricted ones is still pretty expensive. So I understand, I heard everything you said. There's no easy solution here. I don't know the solution, but what we're coming up with doesn't seem like it actually is going to help a lot. So I just wanted to reiterate what Robin's been saying. And I understand you're all doing your best. I don't know the answer. So
Well, thanks. We don't necessarily have the answer either, but we're going to keep working on it. And it, again, I think all we can do is say that we empathize and we agree, and we're going to continue to try and fight these fights to find different solutions, better solutions. But Andrea, did you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, sorry, I joined a little late, so I don't know exactly what you said, John. But in terms of the Home Buyer Opportunity Fund that the Home Trust is going to be administering, Robin, I do understand that the concept behind saying, other developers should be contributing. And so we are going to be working on a campaign to grow the fund to 250,000. So that it can be distributed to a lot more people. And we would love to have developers contributing to this fund. And this is a topic for another time, but just throwing it out there, there could be something if the deed restrictions aren't addressing a low enough area median income or a low enough sales price, maybe there could be like a fee in lieu type of thing where the developer would have to contribute a fairly large chunk of change to the fund in lieu of doing these deed restricted units in their market rate projects. And then that way we could actually build affordable housing that is much more affordable. So just throwing that out there, and yeah.
Thanks, Andrea. Okay, anybody else have public comments about anything not otherwise on the agenda tonight? And thanks everybody for their comments on that item.
John, it's Jim.
Yeah, go ahead.
It is actually specific to tonight's agenda. I just want to offer up, I did a little research, and the one thing that they consultants who I think did an excellent job on the water study did not address was dust on snow out of Utah.
Jim, the public comment session we're in right now is for things that aren't on the agenda. So there'll be an opportunity for you to bring that up on the next item when we start going into the water assessment. And I know exactly where you're going. I know I've been following Jeff Derry's work on that for a number of years now. So let's go ahead and move to the presentation of the water supply assessment. Preston, I don't know if you want to interview or introduce Mark and Ashley, or whether I can just let them take it away.
No, thank you, Mayor and members of council. I'd love to introduce Ashley and Mark, if that's okay with you. So
yeah, go for it.
And provide some background, though most of council should be privy to this, but glad to see that there's so much interest in this. We have, looks like 37 people in this Zoom room, which is great. So it was last July, after a competitive bid process, you all, town council, approved the professional services agreement between the town and LRE Water for the preparation of a water supply assessment. It's a project that's been asked about a number of times over the last 7 months or so, and has obviously garnered quite a bit of interest, understandably so. Staff has been working with LRE Water to provide the information and production data necessary for them to quantify the existing and future water demands, to evaluate the adequacy of the existing water supply system to meet those demands, and then to identify any deficiencies in either available physical or legal supply. And before you now is the resulting investigative study. All that said, I hope you all have had a chance to delve into it. It was issued about 10 days ago or so. And here with us this evening are Ashley and Mark with LRE Water, and I'll turn it over to them.
Welcome, guys.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Preston. Ashley Moffin, and I got Mark here. I was the lead engineer and Mark the lead hydrologist on this study. And I guess before we dive into the water, I'm based in Glenwood Springs, so the conversation that you guys had pre us getting on is very much prevalent in our neck of the woods too. So it was interesting to hear that. So without further ado, we'll jump into our presentation. I know there was a lot there in the report, and what we're going to try to do this evening is sort of step through the different sections at a high level, but I would certainly encourage folks as we're making our way through to raise their hand. And Preston, I might ask you to jump in if I'm missing someone who wants to dive in a little deeper on any one of these topics. So I will share screen. And are you guys seeing the full presentation?
Change your display settings.
What was that?
Change your display setting so it says the other monitor at the very top.
Oh,
Yep.
yeah, thanks, Mark.
We're seeing presenter view. There
Ah.
you go.
There we go. Awesome. So on our agenda today, we'll sort of go through the key objectives of the study, a system overview, and then we'll dive into the real key pieces, which are what are the system demands, both existing today and what we're projecting into the future, and then the supplies that you have available to meet those demands, both from a physical supply perspective and from the legal water rights that support those physical diversions. Then we will get into how we compared those demands with those supplies in a water supply demand model and evaluate those results. And then we'll sort of conclude with some high-level discussion on water right strategies, and then more specific findings and recommendations. So the key objectives from the RFP were to first start by reviewing the water supply system that the town has. So this is sort of the physical infrastructure, the nuts and bolts, review the water right portfolio that supports that physical system, and then quantify water demands within the city service area, both existing and future, and analyze those demands against what is physically available. On the physical availability side, we used both the historic hydrology, and we also modeled a hydrology that took into consideration climate change. And we analyzed the physical and legal availability against the demands to see how the system will hold up now and into the projected future. And then, as I said, we'll get into strategies, summary of findings, and recommendations. So starting off, I know you all are there, but sometimes you'd be surprised how often people don't really know the system, how they get their water from their tap. For the town, there are two main sources of supply. You have Beaver Creek, where the Ridgway ditch diverts from, which is over here. And then you also have Happy Hollow Creek, which diverts from the Cottonwood Creek drainage. The Ridgway ditch runs in a open ditch to Lake Ottawanda. It can also directly feed the town's pre-sediment ponds before it goes into treatment. And the Happy Hollow ditch delivers supplies directly into the pre-sediment ponds for treatment. And from there, the town actually has two service lines. There is a treated potable line and a raw water line, which we will get into with system demands.
Actually, just so everybody knows, that last map was with west at the top, south at the left. Just
correct for the exactly for the purposes of
getting it on the
the
slide.
screen for a PowerPoint. We flipped
gotcha.
it. So yes, so this is north and this is yes.
North is to the right. south
Myself
is to the
north
left.
and south. Yes.
Thank you.
So what we started with the existing water demands, we had you'll see up here, we separated it into two parts. There's a total demand, which is equal to the potable system, and that's the water supply that's delivered for all of your indoor services plus everybody's lawns and gardens. And then the town also has a raw water line that they use for irrigation of larger parks and open space. So based on the town's production records, we evaluated the existing potable and raw water system. And I will get beat up by Joanne afterwards if I don't give you guys a big disclaimer that says some of that data is up for interpretation. It was the best available that we had. I think when we get into the weeds of the report, you'll see that on a per capita basis for indoor winter use, we were showing about 125 gallons per person per day. And that's definitely on the higher end of the spectrum. Based on actual sales, Joanne was saying that it's probably closer to 70. The reality of your actual demand is probably somewhere in between. But it was the best available data at hand, and so that's what we pressed forward with. You can see in this graphic here that the blue on the bottom, that's the potable. You can kind of tell in the winter that would be your base load for indoor use. And then it kind of has that bell-shaped curve, which is natural of irrigation, shoulder seasons, where in the spring you're using a little bit, it increases through the summer, decreases down through the fall. And then layered on top of that then is the average raw water component. So basically what we're saying is right now, the town has a population of approximately 1,150 residents, and the total annual demand is 300 and call it 15 acre feet per year. So using those as a basis, we did 3 projections. We have a low growth projection, which was based on county data from Ridgway County, from the state demographer's office. We have the medium growth, and then we had a high growth, which is representative of if the town did what it did the last, I think it was 10-year period, 10 or 20-year period of 2% per year. And so using those numbers, we projected 3 potable treated demands. And then we just assumed that the raw water system would, over this study period from 2021 to 2050, would increase by 25%. So what that means is, and on this, we kind of kept it, the table in gallons, million gallons per day. It's kind of more of a treatment plant number. You go from something that's around just under 70 million gallons up to a high of 125 under high growth scenarios. And then you can see on the far right here, the number of residents that we're projecting. So at that higher end, we're ending up with just over 2,000 residents. And then on the low growth, it would be more like 1,400. So I'll take a quick pause there before we jump into the water availability piece, just to see if anybody has any comments or questions about the demands. Right. Pressing forward. When we look at water availability, we really break it into 2 pieces. There's the legal piece and there's the physical piece, and both are equally important. If you have an abundant water source, but you have a very junior water right that is prone to being called out and shut off due to a senior water rights need, that's not that great, right? And likewise, if you have a super senior water right, but a very limited source, you're also limited. So you're trying to kind of find that sweet spot where you have the physical supply that you need to meet your needs and the priority of a water right that can carry you through a dry period. So in looking at the legal availability, we're starting with Beaver Creek with the Ridgway ditch. There are a total of 3 water rights decreed to the ditch. The original irrigation right for 25 CFS was filed by the Water and Power Company. Later, the town acquired the Siebert Ditch water right for 2 CFS, and it has a senior priority. So even though the 25 was the first right with the ditch, by transferring this more senior water right that the town acquired, that 2 CFS is the first in line. And then lastly, we have 5 CFS that the town decreed as part of what I would call the Ridgway system. So that piece came along with the Happy Hollow, Lake Ottawanda, and the pre-sedimentation ponds. So as it relates to Beaver Creek, you're suspect to river administration on everything tributary from where you're at. So starting at the Ridgway Ditch Head Gate, down to the confluence of the East Fork of Dallas Creek, down through Dallas Creek, onto the Oncompadre, and then actually out to the Gunnison and potentially the border at Colorado. So we looked at the Division of Water Resources in the state of Colorado. They do a really good job of cataloging these calls. So we reviewed the history of what the town's rights would be subjected to. And on a local scale, in recent years, there have been calls on Dallas Creek from the Woodperry Ditch and the Evans Ditch. These calls at times have been senior enough that none of the priorities of the Ridgway Ditch would be in priority or be allowed to divert. And then more often, the call was just knocking out the 25 and 5 CFS water right, but the 2 CFS Seabird Ditch right was still able to divert. And then what you all are probably more common, or what's more common probably around the water cooler is the call on the Uncompadre River, which is the Montrose and Delta Canal. And that call is typically not senior enough to knock out the Seabird Ditch. I think once in a very, very dry year, it placed a priority that was senior to that right, but most of the time it's just knocking out the 25 and 5 CFS. So for modeling purposes, we sort of took the position that for the 2 CFS senior priority in the ditch, in dry years, we would say that it would not be able to divert in May, July, and August. And that the 25 and 5 CFS would not be able to divert or would be out of priority. Oh, yeah.
You're good, sorry.
Did someone have a...
No.
Oh, okay. May through September. So those were constraints that we put on the physical system. So moving into the physical system, we took the diversion records that are available again through the Division of Water Resources at the Ridgway Ditch Headgate, and we applied those legal constraints. In addition, we also looked at 2 sort of modeling scenarios. So we started with the actual ditch record itself, which is what you're seeing in the bars across the top of the graphic. And then we said, okay, what is available to the town? And we defined 2 types of operations, one that we called current operations and one that we called full entitlement. So current operations was our attempt to try to take the diversion record from the Ridgway Ditch Headgate and match it with some of the data that the town has been collecting independently at Lake Ottawanda. So there's a flume there that has an inflow supply, and based on trying to match those up, it appeared that 37% of the water supply from the headgate was making it to the town's point of delivery. We also decided to look at a potential operation that we're calling full entitlement, where we said, what if the town took its full 2 CFS supply? So you get the first 2, you're entitled to the first 2. What if we make sure that that 2 is always getting delivered? Then in working with town staff, even though the diversion records might have said that there was up to 1.5 CFS available in the winter, we chose for modeling purposes to limit that to just 0.25 CFS based on what historically has been seen. But again, we'll hit it in some recommendations a little later. But that's what you're seeing here is that if at the headgate there was, 1,700 acre feet per year, under current operations, the town's getting approximately 675 acre feet of that supply. But if you leverage the seniority of your water right, we're saying that you could probably get on average 800. And so that's a increase of about 125 acre feet. And then in dry years, we even showed that that difference is even greater. You could get 200 as the difference between current and full entitlement. So then, and I know we'll be asked some questions on this, it sounds like. We did do some climate change adjustments. The state, at a state level and a basin-wide level, has worked through state modeling efforts, a number of different climate change scenarios. We looked at what is called the in-between scenario and the hot and dry scenario. And for the purposes of modeling, we really focused on the hot and dry because that's the most extreme application of these climate change considerations. So essentially it's taking the diversion record that we had and making these adjustments. And you can see where, you know, we've got the teal bars across the top. That was the actual the gray was what was in the previous slide as the diversion, and the teal is the climate change adjustment. So you can see that on current operations, it was a reduction of about 127 acre feet per year, or almost 20%. And then the full entitlement, it wasn't as impactful, more like a 4 to 5% reduction in what could be delivered to the town.
Ashley, if I could interrupt for a second.
Yeah.
So what's not shown on this slide and what's in the report is as a monthly distribution for climate change. The projections that we use essentially shift the hydrograph to about a month sooner. So the peak arriving in May, and then, you know, the percentages that are listed in there, I think is 12% for the in between and 22% for the hot and dry. Those are based upon the comparison between. Sorry, that's based upon the simulated flow at Beaver Creek within that data set. So it's a local hydrology that was applied, and those adjustments were brought forward for these diversions. So it even though you see it annually here, there is a shift in timing and volume.
I also see a
And it looks like Terry, yeah.
Are you acknowledging my hand up?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it may not affect your calculations at all based on, you know, whatever conservative nature you use for that climate adjustment. But just want to note today that the UN released a report where the opening sentence of the article about it says the impacts of global warming are appearing faster than previously expected. According to a new major scientific report, it could soon become much harder to cope. I'm wondering if there's room for a sliding scale on that adjustment, if it's worthy of taking new data into consideration, or is this pretty conservative estimate as it is?
So the hot and dry, it represents the 75th percentile. So if you look in the documentation, it'll explain what that means. But of the global circulation models, it's on the conservative end for sure. And the in between represents kind of a median. And in comparison to historical, what that means is that the in between piece is still hotter and drier, but not as extreme as the hot and dry piece is. The reason that we chose the scenarios we chose is that they're consistent with the Colorado Water Plan and the technical update. Is there room for additional information? Is there room for improvement? Absolutely. And from the perspective of, just in general, whether climate change is real or not, you look at the last 20 years versus the historical, the full historical record, and we've seen, something like 6 different dry years within the time frame. So in our study period itself, on top of the conservative estimate of this 22% reduction in flow, we have 6 or maybe even 7 dry years that represent some pretty bad conditions, both physically and administratively on the river.
Great, thank you.
And I would just add to that, Mark, in something that to make it even simpler is if you look at the graphic of the total supply available at the ditch, and we only modeled you taking a maximum of up to year 2. So in essence, you have a bit of a buffer. Like if all this water above the dashed line here went away, you would still come out ahead based on this analysis.
And that's absolutely true.
Now, that doesn't get into the, yeah, and that doesn't get into the seasonality, like Mark said. I mean, there could be a month, but that's why it's so important that you guys have storage, because that's the ultimate in retiming. And I mean, that's how the West operates, right? We have periods where we have an abundant supply of water and then it gets super dry. So along with what we're showing here, when we get into sort of more of the modeling and outcome, is the importance of LACO operations and being able to match that timing.
I see
It
another
looks
hand
like
up.
we have a question from a Jack.
Yeah, go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, I was just questioning, this is obviously a very conservative projection, and I was curious to see if Terry was suggesting that the 20% climate change adjustment was not enough.
I was more alluding to just the report that came out today that said previous estimates of climate change were underestimated, which we'll probably see that refrain repeated over and over for the next few years, my guess is. And then specifically, the report points out the few regions around the world that have the most impact, and Western United States is one of the leading concerns.
So you're suggesting that the 20% is not enough?
I'm not suggesting that. I'm just wondering if there was room for that to be scaled. Should some of the data suggest that there's a need for further conservative estimates?
Or another way of looking at it is, where does this?
Excuse me, I was talking there.
Excuse me, I was trying to help Terry clarify.
Okay, go ahead.
I think what Terry's saying is he kind of wanted to figure out where this fell on, the order of a little bit of change to a lot of bit of change relative to what estimates have been. And so if this is closer to estimating a lot of change, maybe in light of recent analysis makes more sense.
Does that answer your question, Jack?
Not really, but I'll let it go. Let Beth talk.
Yeah,
No, that's all I had to say. Go ahead.
I think there'll be plenty of opportunity to discuss some of these issues further. I mean, combined with the comment Jim was starting to make in the public comment section about dust on snow, that's a whole nother issue that's mentioned several times in the report as not being taken into account in these numbers, because we don't know how to take it into account, right? But let's wait to delve into these kinds of analytical questions at the end, if we could, unless there's something somebody doesn't understand while they're presenting the slides. So go ahead, Ashley.
All right, thanks, John. And I guess I'll just reiterate that at any point in our modeling and evaluation of things, we always sort of default to using the most conservative value, right? I mean, we used a more conservative demand number than is probably, actual. We're using a more conservative approach on the legal. And then, again, it comes down to best available data at the time. But as we'll get to in the recommendations, I mean, as stuff improves data and information, absolutely revisit these concepts. So in transitioning from our Beaver Creek system to the Cottonwood Creek system and the Happy Hollow Ditch, much simpler system in terms of the water rights. There's just the 2 CFS water right that again is a part of what I call the whole Ridgway water system when it was decreed, along with the Ridgway ditch right, Lake Ottawa, and the pre-sedimentation ponds. They were all collectively decreed together. There is one little note on this 2 and the other 5 that was with the Ridgway ditch. They have a combined limit. I don't think, we factored that in, but that's not anything that was a hindrance in the town's ability to divert. Administratively on the Cottonwood Creek, there's really the Tidwell Ditch is the major call on Cotton Creek itself. And what we did there was that ditch has a water right for irrigation that's senior to the town in the amount of 0.375 CFS. And we essentially just took the diversion record and subtracted that 0.37 CFS every day during the irrigation season. That is also conservative in the sense that, you know, I know when people are haying, they'll turn their water down, and there would be opportunities throughout that season for the town to take a little extra water. But for the purposes of this, we remove that supply as being available. The other administrative piece is, you know, the M&D call could technically call out this water right. The division engineer's office for the Gunnison area has always sort of maintained that it's a feudal call. And what they mean by feudal call is in the area where Cottonwood Creek would meet the Uncompadre River, it dries up. So the division engineer looks at it as like, if I shut you off, it doesn't really matter because that supply that I'm shutting you off of isn't making it to the calling right on the Uncompadre River. We'll get into a recommendation about that a little later. But essentially for Cottonwood Creek, we just subtract the 0.375. Again, we use the division's daily diversion records as a starting point. So here you have the head gate of the 455 acre feet per year. And then you have what we're calling in this scenario, current operations is just being subtracting off that amount for the Tidwell ditch irrigation, right? And then again, we did the similar hot and dry climate adjustment for the Happy Hollow diversions. And that ended up resulting in about a 22% reduction in annual supplies. So once we kind of get our arms around the legal and the physical piece of all of it, we dive into modeling the two together. And so we put together a spreadsheet model and gave it some rules. So this is a little diagram of how it's working. So we gave it an order of priority on how the town's demands would be fulfilled. We started with, if water was available in Happy Hollow Ditch, take it first because it's gravity fed and higher quality water. Then if that wasn't sufficient to meet demands, go to your Ridgway ditch supply. And then if that wasn't sufficient, you go to your Lake Ottawanda supply. And then finally, if we run Lake Ottawanda dry, you can take the little bit that's left in the pre-sediment ponds. And then after that, we start showing shortages. Below here, you'll see, we just talked about how we have two hydrologies that we're modeling, a historic and a climate change. We have two conditions really for the Ridgway ditch, which is current and full entitlement. We also modeled Lake Ottawanda as having, just a 2.5%. We're calling it just a system loss. We applied it there because it was an easy place to do it. So we have having that 2.5% loss versus, reducing losses in the network down to zero. And then we have demands of either, can you meet the whole demand? And that's the treated potable as well as the raw water line. And we have our three growth scenarios. So in total, there's 48 scenarios here. For the purposes of the analysis and what we presented in our report, we really focused on 8 being meeting the total demand at high growth, and then sort of flipping between the two hydrologies, the two operations at Ridgway Ditch, and this idea of system losses. So our first sort of pairing of model scenarios here is current operations is on the top. Well, current operations is happening with both. The top graphic has the 2.5% loss, and the bottom graphic has 0 loss for historic hydraulic conditions. So what you can see here is, the rules that we have. The purple along the bottom is Happy Hollow meeting sort of your base load. Then we've got this teal color coming in, and that's Ridgway Ditch. So in average years, Ridgway Ditch and Happy Hollow are fully meeting the demand. Then we start getting ourselves into like a dry year, 2012, 2013. And now we're starting to have to really tap into our Lake O storage reserves. And then you can see here, just this last year's hydrology, we would have broke the bank. and had a shortage. If we get rid of system losses, which is a little unrealistic, but in modeling, you know, we're trying to balance, bookend things. You can run through the whole 30 years of historic hydrology at high growth and meet your total demand. So similarly, for our historic hydrology, we look at, okay, well, what if you exercise your full 2 CFS senior water right in the Ridgway ditch? And basically what we're showing is there's no shortage. If you do that, regardless of if you address system losses, you should be able to meet the 2050 high demand, which is this 512 acre feet per year without shortage. And then we run through these same sort of groupings of 2 with climate change. And you can see that climate change under current conditions, it gets more severe. We have more years with more gaps. And even if we get rid of system losses, we're still in trouble during that 2002, 2003 period. But if we exercise full entitlement of the town's 2 CFS senior priority in the Ridgway ditch, you're able to meet full demand with climate change hydrology at high growth. So this all gets kind of summarized a little bit more succinctly in this bubble chart here, where you can really get a flavor for when these shortage events are happening and the magnitude of which they're happening. So like if we just look at current conditions, historical and climate change, you can see the impact of the climate change hydrology that we put in there. You have more severe, more often shortage events, and that you're not able to overcome that even if you reduce your system losses to 0. But you know what we really keyed in on was what we're calling that H2A scenario and the C2A scenario, where under either hydrology, if you use your full entitlement, there are no shortages. And going along with shortages, we also sort of looked at the firm yield. So firm yield is if you can always meet your total supply, like we can see here in these 3 high growth historic hydrology runs, then it's always just the total demand and you can meet the 2050 year. But in a year where we had shortages, so if we look at current operations under historic hydrology, we're saying that you couldn't meet the 512 acre feet per year, but you could meet 427. And we're projecting that you would hit that number in 2039. So that gives you an idea of how, if you did have an issue, what is the timeline in hitting that shortage? And so then again here for climate change hydrology, under high growth, you could meet 394 acre feet or 487, depending on what you did with system losses. And it could be as soon as 2034 or 2047. And then what's nice about this graphic is, as you can see, if the town had low growth or medium growth, you're meeting those under almost all conditions. And then what isn't on this, but it is noted in the report, is that under all scenarios, if you just needed to meet the potable demand, you could do it. So we'll jump into some strategies and some recommendations, but does anybody have any specific modeling questions with our approach or confusion? And I know there's a lot to digest there, and we tried to find meaningful ways to display it for you guys, but there's a lot going on. So seeing no hands, we'll dive into water supply strategies. So at the top here, location, location, location. That's really the name of the game when we start thinking about water supply strategies, is where these opportunities would be located, right? So we picked a couple that are things that lots of municipalities and lots of water supply providers are looking at. Increased storage. Storage is highly valuable because it provides the flexibility, like I was talking about earlier, where you're able to capture that water during spring runoff and release it later in the season when flows are either physically or legally limited. You can acquire water rights to help, this might not help the physical part of your system, but if we had a legal issue, would bolster maybe your ability to take the physical supply at where the diversion is. And then you could also develop a plan for augmentation. And a plan for augmentation helps in the sense of, instead of having to, on a 1-for-1 basis, replace your depletive or your diversions. So let's say you divert 1 CFS from the Ridgway ditch. If you don't have a plan for augmentation, you essentially have to make sure that the downstream call doesn't see that 1 CFS impact. If you have a plan for augmentation that sort of spells out how your water is being used within your service area, you can augment less than the diversion amount. For indoor use, it's somewhere on the magnitude of 90 to 95% is returned back to the river system through your wastewater treatment plant. And then anywhere from maybe 20 to 15% gets returned back through what they call lawn irrigation return flow. So the water that isn't consumed by the crop that makes it back to the river. So those are ways to sort of leverage how much you divert and what you replace. Now, back to the location piece, if you're increasing storage or acquiring a water right, you would want it to be located such that it could directly connect to your system as it is. There are ways, like through a plan for augmentation and legal water court cases, where you can exchange that water, but exchanges get complicated quickly, and you have to then start looking at all the water users in between where your resource is and where you need to use it. So then we sort of dove into what are our findings and recommendations, and we sort of broke them into some key areas. So in terms of the historic hydrology, I think the biggest one that came out of this, as I've probably highlighted, and that's through this presentation, is that if the town managed its full entitlement of the 2 CFS decree to the Ridgway ditch, it can meet the total 2050 municipal demand at high growth. Also, if operations continue without change to how the Ridgway ditch is managed, or without improving system losses, you could meet the 2050 demand at high, or the 2050 demand at high growth would not be met, and you would start to see shortages in 2039. And then under all modeling conditions, the town's potable supply could be met. Climate change hydrology. I think that was must be a duplicate. Data improvements, and we've touched on this a little bit earlier. The production records, verify the accuracy of the meters at the water treatment plant, and continue. The town's been doing, I think, for 2 years now, they've been systematically going through and replacing customer meters. I mean, the better production data you have, the better idea we have on what the number is that you need to serve today as well as in the future. Lake Ottawa records, implement best management practices to ensure that quality data is being collected, especially during the winter. And then Ridgway ditch diversions. For a lot of ditches, it's not uncommon to only have records that are observed, maybe weekly during the irrigation season, monthly, maybe less frequently during the winter. Because we're saying how important it is for the town to be able to, based on the records, it's showing that there's plenty of water for the town to always have the supply it needs to feed the demand. But maybe consider installing monitoring equipment at the headgate facility that you guys can see real time or at least download and know more frequently what exactly is there and available to take. Legal availability, while our modeling showed that all you needed was the 2 CFS entitlement, we're recommending that you consider implementing guidelines and practices on how you manage that. Maybe it's based on reservoir levels in Lake Ottawa, something that triggers you to say, hey, we need our full 2. And then Cottonwood Creek administration, continue to monitor stream flow conditions near the confluence. This goes back to that feudal call that I was describing. If for some reason something were to change, you would want to be aware that then there's a potential for legal limitations on the Happy Hollow Ditch. In terms of development code, the town currently has an adequate water supply rule. We're recommending that you consider modifying the existing code to be more in line with the typical development that's within the town service area. I think that the code now is for larger scale development, which maybe isn't representative of how development is occurring within the service area. We're also recommending in terms of raw water that when properties apply to be annexed into the town service area, the town should examine, one, the potential opportunity to acquire the water rights decreed to irrigate that annexed land if they're there, and then to promote the continued use of raw water irrigation through the development, because that's a bonus both in treatment and in maintaining the water rights without having to do a bunch of legal hoop jumping. And then in terms of legal considerations, I'm sure most of you are very aware that Ridgway County is in the process of a water court case. Continue to be actively engaged with the county as it relates to the potential to increase the exchange capacity. We can certainly dive into the details on this if folks want to, but it's more just monitoring. I think this will continue. It's got some issues, and I don't think it'll be resolved anytime soon, but definitely something that you all should stay aware of and keep your eyes on. And then finally, some water rights cleanup. You know, we didn't really talk a lot about that 25 CFS right that is after the town's first 2. The town does have ownership in that, and it is a little messy in how the language of the agreements work, and we're just recommending that you potentially hire a water rights attorney to once and for all sort of resolve any ambiguity with that, so you know for certain how you can use your 3 CFS of that right. And then finally, keep an eye on climate change considerations. Like we said, you know, dust on snow was not part of the available data that we have to us, but as more research is done and if things are getting improved on the basin or statewide level for the Gunnison Southwest area, then definitely look to make improvements on this modeling effort. And then also there's a lot of money right now floating around for water projects and improvements. So, you know, continue to figure out if there's availability from these funding sources, you know, the Colorado Water Plan, Gunnison Basin Roundtable. And that is it.
Great,
So
thank you guys.
Open it up for more discussion.
Thanks so much. Nice presentation. It's a incredibly detailed, comprehensive report, and we really appreciate all your hard work on this. I see hands up already. I'd like to start out with just a question or two of my own. One on, I know the dust on snow issue is going to be brought up and discussed hopefully further. Are you guys aware of the work that Jeff Derry's doing at the Center for Snow and Avalanche Studies?
You know, John, Joanne definitely made us aware of that. And I guess I'll just say right now, she was a tremendous asset and help just with her knowledge of all of this. And we worked back and forth quite a bit. And she brought up that in, you know, our initial review of the report and analysis. So we hadn't been aware of it. she was mentioning it. And I think I'll let, Mark maybe dive in a little more, because he was doing that aspect of it. If you could add anything, Mark. I mean, I know it's a complex thing to try to bring into a model to start with, and kind of within the scope of what our project was. I don't think that we could have done more than what was out there available to use. But Mark, if you have more to add to that.
The only thing I would say regarding dust on snow that's kind of tough is that, the impacts, of course, are, a significant increase in the timing of the hydrograph, right? There's this thermal mass as a result of the dust that increases the amount of runoff, and that happens pretty quickly. So the question is how frequently, and how do you represent it if it happens, within a 10 to 15 day window. The model that we built is a monthly model. So we could have certainly taken an approach to prorate these monthly values to be more in line with the dust on snow event. But again, how do we figure out the frequency for which these things happen? Does it happen every year? Does it happen every third year? How do we include all of those complexities? And as Ashley said, we stopped with the climate adjusted flows based upon the water plan, and felt like that was a good representation of, or a good conservative representation of that adjustment. Is it perfect? No. Should it continue to be looked at? Yeah, as we said, it absolutely should.
Thanks. I didn't want you to think that I was saying that you could have or should have done more. I just wondered if you were aware of it, because I think we are all going to need to pay attention to it going forward, because it sure seems to be something that in the past, say 10 years was not necessarily an every year event, and now it looks like it's starting to be definitely an every year event. So it's just curious what you were aware of. So it totally get your stance on it, and I think it's appropriate. The only other question I'd have before we go to the rest of council and the public is, for years in my involvement with the town over decades, there's always been discussion about the possibility of piping the water from higher up above Lake O to Lake O, or basically just putting more of our water source in a pipe, and didn't see any mention of that here. So I just wondered if you guys had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, John, and we kind of stuck it at Lake O because it was an easy place for modeling, but certainly that 2.5% loss. And I guess I should also say that's a 2.5% per month loss.
Yeah.
Was sort of a representative of that whole system, basically the Ridgway ditch to Lake Ottawa piece of it. But we reviewed some of the prior reports that had been done from Applegate, and from the latest one that was the CAR. And I believe that the Applegate one said that there was some significant losses, and I believe they were recommending the town look into some piping. It seemed like that narrative flipped a little bit with the CAR and some additional flume and monitoring work along the ditch that maybe indicated that those losses weren't as extreme. But certainly, I mean, that's something that we could easily look at if we wanted to bump that 2.5% per month to something higher, if we thought that that was a consideration that needed to be looked at more in more detail.
Okay, thanks. And I'd like to give council an opportunity to ask questions first, and then we'll go to the public. So thanks for being patient, Jack and Pat and others. Anybody else on council have questions out of the gate?
When the evaporation rate for Lake O was taken into consideration, it was based on, I can't remember the exact source, but for reservoirs over 6,500 feet. Does that account for increased temperatures under climate change? Is that number just a static one from historic data?
Well, no, the above 6,500. So where we got the numbers is they have, NOAA has what they call these atlas lines, where they've drawn what the inches per year would be in certain areas. Granted, that probably is a little dated and could be improved. The distinction between above and below 6,500 feet is a monthly distribution that the state does. And that's a pretty standard estimation for water right practice.
Great, and that makes sense. So my question is that based on historical data or forward modeling?
I
as
don't
we're
know how
trying
the
to-
state came up with that.
I'm gonna guess it's based on historical data, but that's just my guess. I was just trying to, as we look at this overall climate impact, Laco's not that big surface area wise, but I was just curious.
The evaporation
and
piece
go ahead,
evaporation
Mark.
piece could definitely be improved. That, like you said, the distribution is based upon the NOAA Atlas pieces, as well as some guidance from the Division of Water Resources regarding SWSPs. Could it be shifted to be more in line with climate change being a hotter and drier sooner and earlier, and even from a volume standpoint? Sure, but then it's not going to increase. As far as conservatively, the evaporation is not going to increase. The loss is not going to be an increase of 10% above what. So that wasn't something that we took into consideration and honestly, there's not very good information. I think the Bureau just recently came out with some adjustments for their reservoirs. And we're looking, we're trying to figure out from a state perspective, for state line stuff, whether or not those are even reasonable. And it's hard because they're, it's based upon, like you said, recent information, and you're trying to apply it over a historical period. So some of the issues to do that are actually pretty hard to implement and without not a lot of change in the result.
Yeah.
Well, and then I'll add, Mark, too, that one of the recommendations of improvements of what's existing in terms of monitoring at Laco, you guys do have the inflow being monitored, the outflow, and the change in storage. So in terms of a water balance, we always say, change in storage equals inflow minus outflow minus, and evaporation is kind of part of that. So if you really dialed in your own data, you would be able to assess what if you were overestimating or underestimating that evap, because it would come in as either like an unmeasured gain or an unmeasured loss. So really, again, it's kind of a theme. If you get better data, it's going to improve the analysis that we did.
That makes sense, definitely. Anybody else on council have a question or comment? All right, I'll take it to Jack Petroselli. Go ahead, Jack.
Hey there. Want to say this is a great report. Ashley, thanks for putting this together, and Mark. I have a couple of questions. I was real encouraged to hear that you spoke about piping the Ridgway ditch. I think that it's pretty obvious that piping the Ridgway ditch will solve a lot of problems and give us the opportunity to protect ourselves for the next 30 or 40 years. But the question I had, Ashley, was when you did the projections, how far back did you go on the historical data? Was it 10 years or 20 years or 100 years? Or kind of curious what you used for data.
Now, are you talking about diversion data?
Yeah, and use data.
Yeah, the gauge data. Well, the gauge data goes back on Ridgway ditch to 1950, but there was gaps between, we didn't have a consecutive record. So we started in 1990 because that was the furthest back we could go with the consecutive record. And we felt comfortable with that time period because it includes a number of wet, average, and very dry years. I mean, I think in all the modeling probably that Mark and I have done, besides, maybe the 50s drought and a little bit of the late 70s, I mean, what we went through in the early 2000s and then, 2012, 2013, and then more recently, 2018 and just last year, I think are representative of years that really stress the system, which at the end of the day is what we're looking to model against.
I'm happy to hear that it's a 40-year window or snapshot. I was afraid that it was less than that. So I'm real happy with that 40 years. So thanks for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Pat Willits.
Hi there. I guess I have a unique perspective here, having been Ridgway's mayor from 2000 to 2012, and then in 2013, having the honor to begin managing the Abardi Ranch, the ranch that has in the middle of it Lake Otonawanda. And we have a sense of water rights that we have, that our water attorney has shared with me, that it's a little bit different in how we get there, but your bottom line number of 2 CFS available to the town as its first highest priority, I guess, is what about where we land on that as well, with the exception that the Abardi Ranch and our neighbors have some of that water right as well. And water courts, I think, have pretty much landed on the side of it, that water right going to first to domestic use, and that's what's the way the reality has been. But for the last 5 years, after I was learning that we couldn't get any reliable data from the town on Lake Otonawanda's performance, and we were concerned about it because it's our understanding that in good years, the ranch is entitled to some of that water for use. And the reality was in the first few years I was at the ranch, the reservoir was under construction. We were able to take advantage of that water. In the last couple of years, there's been calls and such on the water, and we and our neighbors that we think we have some of that legal water right don't get any of it. But starting in 2017, when we couldn't get data from the town, we just started taking about weekly monitoring and checking out the measuring sticks on the ditches and on the lake itself. And we don't have the benefit of knowing, what's coming out in from the head gate on Beaver Creek or what the town is taking out. But what we do see is what the level of the water is in the lake, and what's some sense of what's coming in through the ditches. And our observations for the last 5 years, from 2017, well, through 2020, and now we're still into 20 and through 2021, has been that the lake actually loses water in the wintertime, even though there is anywhere from, it looks like about a half a CFS seeming coming into the water, the whole lake the whole time. And the lake's covered with ice and snow, so we wouldn't expect there to be evaporation. So I'm confident that in addition to evaporation, you've got some sort of seepage loss going on in Lake Otonawanda. And I think if you looked at the amount of water on the stick in November and the amount of water back in the spring, it would be real to you to see that there's a seepage loss in addition to evaporation loss. And modeling is one thing, and I think the town ought to take a really hard look at what gets diverted at Beaver Creek and what ends up in Lake Otonawanda, because I have a feeling that number is significantly, there's a significant loss in those 3 miles based on what we see coming into the lake. We also see, for the last 5 years, pretty consistent use patterns, not knowing how much of that water the town is actually taking. But it doesn't appear to me that there's a lot of extra water that as the town grows than what is already available. And you might talk, water rights might be one thing, but the actual amount of water coming in to the lake is another. And this concept, Ashley, no offense of full entitlement, but I don't think there is more water available that the town hasn't gotten in the last few years. Water rights, there is not being diverted anyplace else from Beaver Creek to Lake Otonawanda. There isn't more water than that somebody else could have taken. So I think that a report that's saying that we have water to double our capacity, based on what I'm seeing in the levels of Lake Otonawanda in the last 5 years, is super over optimistic. And unless you can find efficiencies somewhere else, system losses, I think I worry about what this model is projecting. And that's, I hate to be blunt about it, but that's the truth of the way I feel.
Thanks, Pat.
Well, thanks, Pat. I guess I'll just address a couple things. One, when we're talking about the 2 CFS, there is no sharing of the 2 CFS. That is fully the town's water right. The sharing of the water comes in the next priority, which is the 25 CFS right. And then I don't think we were ignoring potential for seepage. Again, it kind of goes back to what we tagged as this whole system loss. 2.5% per month, we thought was a conservative number to be applying there. I would agree, though, again, it goes back to a little bit of the theme today of, best available data that we had. Because again, I think there's room to improve the demand estimate. It's probably higher than what is actual. And then, yeah, let's better understand what the physical system is there to supply based on what the division engineer is seeing in the field at the head gate. We're just saying that if you were able to get that supply and manage it with even a 2.5% loss per month, you would be able to meet a high growth demand.
However we arrive at it, I think it's a really important next step would be to get a real good grip on what the increased water might be with by putting some or all of Beaver Creek to Lake Otonawanda in a pipe.
Yeah,
there's ecologically, me being sort of concerned about wildlife and wilderness. The wildlife and wilderness love that ditch is not in a pipe. And so there's part of me that thinks there's part of me that would just love that we would never have to. But I think if you're really thinking about how the town's going to grow and where the water's going to come from, that ought to be looked at really seriously. And John, just another aside, and I thought you were going to mention it. At one time, the town, when I was mayor and you were on council, we took a hard look at some sort of a cooperative relationship with Tri-County Water District. And I think for all the right reasons, we chose not to. However, the Weaver development at River Sage did connect to Tri-County, I think, if I remember that correctly. That's and I've always thought that as more subdivisions came online, if there was an opportunity to do that same thing, allow those subdivisions to tag in this is just a crazy aside, but I just wanted to keep that option on the table, that maybe not some sort of relationship with Tri-County that like was being discussed, some sort of toll, give them our water rights and let them deliver us water, but some sort of limited, here's Vista Terrace, or here's the next development besides River Sage. Anyway, that's a crazy aside, but I wanted to mention
it is the devil's in the details, right? And that would be a very devilish detail to work out. So
yeah,
let me go to Jennifer Cram. Go ahead, Jennifer.
So I wanted to just ask Ashley and Mark since you're most familiar with the model, and I think you've sort of touched on it, but in terms of assumptions, what do you guys feel like are the worst assumptions, or maybe that's not the right word, but where you'd like more data, or where you feel like there's the most chance for things not being quite right, or something like that?
Yeah, Jennifer, I think we touch on it, and there's the demand piece that we know can use some improvement. That seems like a pretty easy thing. Let's check the validity of the meters at the treatment plant, and then based on what customers are getting, and then that would help find any leaks, and you can kind of fine tune that number pretty easily. On the water supply side, I think we're suggesting that, if you get a better handle on what is being diverted or what is available at the head gate and what's happening along the pathway to getting to the town and Lake Onondaga operations. And then I think finally it's that climate change. I think those are our three variables that, as better data becomes available, we would just reassess this. And also with like growth numbers, like what if growth goes skyrocketing beyond what we thought was high growth, or what if stuff kind of stalls out? It's very common for us to do one of these and then come back in, say, 5 years and give an update on, hey, we just got a bunch more better data. Let's fine tune this. Let's look at how things have changed. Maybe something's moved with the Ridgway County Water Court case that changes the game. If they're able to increase this exchange capacity, maybe all you need is to buy an insurance policy in Ridgway Reservoir that you can use to provide water to a downstream call. So it's always evolving. I think this was a really great first cut at looking at all of this and kind of finding where there's potential deficiencies in what we had available. And then, like I said, working with Preston and Joanne through all of this, they were great assets, and I know that they're involved in looking at these things, on a daily basis. So I don't know if that answers your question in terms of one over another, but I think overall, there's room to improvement, and I would suggest continuing to look at this periodically.
Thanks. Actually, I might just throw out that, from my perspective, and I'm sure council will agree, this is not just something we're going to take and say thank you and shake your hands and put on a shelf and walk away. This is something that is something we're going to build on, and we're going to continue to revisit, take the recommendations, develop better data. Some of these things we've already been talking about at council for years. So it's all very helpful. And I just want to reassure anybody who's on the call that might be hearing us talk about this and thinking that it's just something we're checking off our list and going to put on the shelf. That's not the case at all. So let me go to Beth.
Did this use any of the geotechnical report that we had done on Lake O for seepage that Preston is not? I can't find it on the website. I'm sure it's buried somewhere in Bob's.
So I will say that we did take a look at the geotech pieces. I'm not sure how much the town wants to talk about that, whether it's confidential or not. So we did look at that, and some of the information, we worked with the town to kind of understand what a good seepage estimate would be, and that's what ended up in the model. But again, it's an estimate, and that information can be refined.
Gotcha.
And I think Pat would readily agree that we've known that Lake O seeps for as long as it's been there. For many decades, the outlet was collapsed, and the water that we got out of Lake O was strictly through seepage into Happy Hollow and Cottonwood Creek. So it's not like we're not aware that there's seepage, and seepage is not probably unusual either. I think, to me, the 2.5% per month it's a big number over a year, and I think that's a reasonable estimate for loss. And there's, as we keep saying, there's a lot we can do to try to minimize that loss. So
Right.
lots of work ahead.
Yeah, the thing about seepage too is it's right off the bottom line. That's water you have in the bank. So it's against your firm yield. It's not just, it's not, something that occurs along the ditch. It's literally taking water from your bank each and every month. Yeah, and so it's not available to you in a dry year.
And I think that as we think about climate change, that changes our calculus on the places where we're like, well, is it worth throwing money to chase seepage? Whereas now, as we look at potentially drier, hotter situations where, the calculus changes and maybe it is worth us.
Well, I guess what I would say is with climate change, it's more frequent dry years.
Yes.
So I think that's the thing that you need to have in the back of your head, is that it's not just about getting the water, it's keeping the water so it's available in a dry year.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that I keep coming back to on the idea of piping from Beaver Creek to the reservoir is that, and Pat, I totally hear you about wildlife and all of that. There's a part of me that doesn't want to see it have to be piped, but when we look at the stats and the data about how the ongoing drought is evolving, it's really the serious drying out of our soils, right? So the ground that the ditch is flowing through is just drier than ever. And so that's obviously going to be taking more out of the ditch as it flows through. There's just, to me, the finding some grant money to pipe as much of Ridgway ditch from Beaver Creek to Lake O would be our number one return, but it's big dollar amount too. JT,
And John, I was just gonna add to your comment there. That's a great observation about soil moisture. And that has been the big thing of late. I think we had that big water year of, was it 2011? And you could really see a material change in Lake Powell. And then we had another big year, I want to say 2017, and it barely made a blip. And it was because of soil moisture deficits soaking that all up before it could get anywhere. And I guess I would just add, in terms of the pipeline piece, another advantage might be, if the water is really there that the state is saying there in the wintertime, that's a really great opportunity for you guys to rebound after a dry year, slowly bring that water in through the winter and build up, Lake storage supplies. So that is another thing to consider when you guys are thinking about pipelines.
Thanks, Ashley. I've seen a couple of hands go up and then go back down. I want to make sure everybody has a chance to speak. I know Jack's hand was back up and JT's hand was up, but they're down now. So I'll go to Kevin Chismeyer, but please, if you want to make a comment or ask a question, please do. Go ahead, Kevin.
This is Joan, actually.
Oh, hi,
kept
Joan.
the computer. Sorry about that.
No worries.
I had a quick question with regard to the study, Ashley and Mark. Did you also configure fire mitigation into this? I was just thinking about it primarily because in December, there was a building in town that burned, and I know that they put 2.5 to 3 hours worth of water on it. And I was just curious if anybody figured out how much water was utilized in that firefight and how that may have computed in with this other study. Thank you.
Yeah, we didn't directly put anything like that in. I mean, it's based off of historic records. So I suppose if there had been fires in the past, it would show up. A single event like that, while it seems like a lot, is probably not going to move the needle on can you meet a drier demand in 2050. What would be more important to look at is in terms of, I would say, wildfire and watershed protection. And what happens if there is a wildfire that took out your ability to use either Happy Hollows drainage or Beaver Creek's drainage? That would have a significant impact. I mean, speaking from my hometown here in Glenwood Springs, we had that canyon fire a couple summers ago, and it really disrupted the town's water supply because they relied primarily on getting drinking water from No Name up in the canyon, and they had to shift to the backup supply being the Roaring Fork, which was a much more turbid supply that then our water treatment plant wasn't really capable of running all the time, right? Like it was an emergency backup thing. So since that fire, the town has had to put in a significant amount of money in, upgrading water treatment, looking at alternatives. So it didn't make it into this report because it wasn't really in the scope of it. But if you guys were thinking in terms of fire, it would be evaluating watershed health in those two drainages and what happens if there were a wildfire.
Okay, and also with regard to Pat mentioning Vista Terrace, where I live, I know that we've been told in the past that we are pretty tight on water up here with our water tank, and that if there was a fire up here, we would potentially have some grief. So I was just wondering, how to mitigate something like that, or bring that to the council maybe in the future, since we're still having build out here on some of the other
Yeah,
areas.
Joan, that's another discussion about water
Yeah.
supplies for Vista Terrace, but it's a good point.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for sharing. Terry?
Yeah, I've got a couple things. One, for what it's worth, and it's probably not comparable, the 2.5% is typical line loss for any electrical circuit as well. So it's a common loss factor, but that's probably irrelevant in this case. But the one question I have is in multiple recommendations, you talked about enhanced monitoring. And I'm wondering if there has been, or can there be a budget put together for what we could implement, on short order for some of this enhanced monitoring? I don't know if that's probably
Yeah,
not
Terry, is your question, could we put together a budget for you on what that would look like?
Yeah, my guess is it's not in your current scope of work, but certainly it rings through on a number of the recommendations. It seems like that's something that we can act on pretty quickly.
We actually have.
Yeah, no,
budgeted.
definitely. That's something that we could probably put together for you. Oh, Joanne, go ahead.
We've actually budgeted for some of that already, Terry.
Okay, good. The last quick point is, and this again is an aside, but if you did pipe that ditch, you could implement a micro hydro system to generate enough electricity to provide power for all or a part of the water treatment plant, which would essentially create a return on investment to help pay for the pipe. Just
We've talked about that. We've definitely talked about that.
That's all I have. Thank
It's in
you.
the capital plan as well.
Great.
It's one of the low hanging fruits that I wanted to make sure you guys heard was just simply meeting with the water commissioner at each of these points of diversion would be a really good first step. The state has a way that they've been collecting diversion records, your official record, and anything you can do to bolster and understand how those records are kept and ultimately what equipment may be needed to monitor those flows, because water commissioner is going to be the one that's going to be up there with some frequency and should be viewed as a partner in this whole thing.
Good point. Thank you. I see Jack Petroselli's got a hand up again.
So let me ask the obvious question. John, do we have any idea what it would cost to pipe the Ridgway ditch?
The short answer is no. It's a big number, millions for sure.
It's 3 miles?
It's closer to 5 miles, and we had done a estimate in the capital plan, and it is many millions. We also looked at the areas that Applegate thought were most likely to be leaking and looked at just piping those areas, and it's still a big number.
There's a lot of money, as the study says, there's a lot of money out there right now. We should definitely be looking at that.
Yeah, I mean, Dorla's got more money than they know how to spend right now. So it's a good time to have this problem. It'd be great if we could pipe that, or even do some type of piping phasing or something.
Thanks, Jack.
The city of Ridgway just completed a similar study with Wright Waterhouse, I think. It just went through the same exercise.
Right. I see a hand up from Gail Melgren.
Hi, guys. Thanks for the report. It's very interesting, and I commend the city for proactively looking at this information. I'm relatively new to the area. I just had two questions. One is your raw water definition strictly agricultural irrigation? And the other is just generally, I was wondering why 30%, only 37% of the water from the head gate gets to the city. And it kind of seemed like something you all knew, but I don't. So I was wondering if generally you could just explain that. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. To the first point, Joanne's probably more equipped to answer it. Our understanding is that it was for parks and open space. And so it really is just a raw water line. It's not, there's at the treatment plant, there's a line going out with just the water that makes it to the pre-sedimentation pond. And then there's what goes into the actual treatment facility. So Joanne, if I didn't quite get that right, please.
And I can, Joanne could weigh in too, but I can add that the non-potable water is how we've always referred to it as opposed to raw. That system waters the Hartwell Park in downtown. It waters the athletic fields. It waters all the parks and open space in town, as Ashley says, and it's actually through sprinklers. So it's an efficient delivery system. And at one point when we first had the brilliant idea of creating a water system that's not treated for our parks and open space, we actually had thought that someday we could actually run the non-potable water lines down the alleys and actually supply it to the townspeople. And then when we started looking at that closer, we realized it just was a real headache. It would have to be metered separately, extremely expensive just to create that system in a way that the townspeople could connect to. And so we just decided that it was much more efficient to just use it for our existing parks and open space. So I hope that helps. I don't know if Joanne, you want to add anything to that?
That's exactly.
Okay, thanks. Hopefully that helps.
And then, sorry, Gail, what was the second half of your question?
All right.
Just a general description of why only 37% of the water from the head gate makes it to the city.
Right, and that was just based on us trying to match what's at the head gate with the data that the town is collecting at Lake Ononowanda.
Over the 2016 to 2019 period.
Yeah.
I think it's mostly a data issue. You know, we need to get better data.
Okay, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure.
I see a Karen with your hand up. Go ahead, Karen.
Well, it's Ken. So yeah, it's her computer.
Oh,
so,
Ken Miller. Hi, Karen.
Yeah, Ken Miller. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi.
I just had a question. I don't know who could answer it. Has Lake Tonawanda ever been filled to capacity?
Since it's been expanded, I don't think so. It was before it was expanded, of course. But Joanne, what's your answer to that?
No, we have not gotten it to the full capacity.
Can it be filled to capacity?
We think so. We just need to
Theoretically.
optimize how much water we're getting to it.
Yeah.
Probably
Okay.
goes back to the question of trying to pipe Ridgway ditch from Beaver Creek. If we can optimize the delivery of our allowed water supply to the lake, we're more likely to fill it, right?
Right.
That's
If it
true.
Leak so bad it wouldn't come to capacity.
Right.
That's right. Is the fuller it is, the more it leaks, right?
Yeah.
Russ, go ahead.
Yeah, there was a comment in here about increasing the storage, and I was curious, where is the optimal place to do that? Would that be somewhere like Lake Tonawanda, or would that be in the pre-sed ponds, or where's our best place to do that?
Yeah, Russ, it would be somewhere where you could fill it with ideally, Beaver Creek water that you already are getting, or Happy Hollow, and that you're upstream of where you need to deliver it. this is where I was kind of getting into. It gets really complicated quickly if, let's say, I mean, for instance, you could buy water in Ridgway Reservoir, but the Colorado Water Conservancy District has what they call in-stream flow rights, which are minimal levels that the stream has to stay. And while your diversion rights are senior to those rights, if you were going to do what we call an exchange, where you say, I'm going to use the water in Ridgway Reservoir and I'm going to release it to the M&D call while I take my water up here that would be called out, you're basically leapfrogging that system and you'd be junior. So it would be very challenging to do, whether you developed storage, bought that storage, or developed your own storage sort of downstream of the system. And that's where it kind of comes into play, this concept of, if the county is successful in this water court case they're trying to decree, they're negotiating the ability to make that action happen. Hope that makes sense. It's a really, we get into really crazy water right world when we start talking exchanges. It gets complicated. So I guess the short answer is, upstream of where your facilities are is doable with less hoops to jump through. Downstream is going to be very challenging.
Sure. Okay.
I want to make sure, Ken Miller, I didn't cut you off. You had finished your, I mean, you basically asked if the lake had ever been full. I want to make sure you didn't have any other questions.
No, I didn't have any other questions. I kind of knew that was the answer, and I knew it hadn't ever been filled, but I think it's pretty optimistic from what I've seen since I've lived here in the last 46 years, that we have enough water for double the amount of residents we have now. Unless there's been a lot of improvements, a lot of ifs in the report. That's all I have to say.
All right, thanks. Anyone else? I don't see any hands up right now. I would just reiterate that just really thank you guys for this study. I think it's really incredible, wonderful detail, but the big takeaway for me is that we have a lot of work in front of us, a lot of work to do to take advantage of the things you recommend, and to do everything we can to optimize our water situation beyond what it is now. I mean, it's an optimistic report, but that optimism is built on really following through with your recommendations. And that's, I think, the thing we need to have be our number one takeaway.
Well, thank you, John. We enjoyed doing the project. It was definitely challenging, and enjoyed working with town staff. Preston and Joanne were great resources. So
thank you.
Thank you guys for allowing us to try to help answer some questions.
Yeah. Even if it creates more questions, right? That's always the case.
We're good at that.
Yeah.
And Mayor, if I can just step in, this is Preston.
Yeah, go ahead, Preston.
I do just want to say a huge thank you to Ashley and Mark. It's been an absolute pleasure working with them over the last several months. I think you all have seen it. It's a great product. Of course, as you said, Mayor, there's things to do. There's a number of things we need to work on to improve the system, et cetera. So again, Ashley, Mark, thank you so much for all your hard work. And I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to Miss Joanne Fagan, our town engineer, for all her work for a long time, but specifically on this project. Some great guidance and leadership on her part. So Joanne, thank you.
Agreed. Thanks, Preston. See a couple thumbs up. And if there isn't anything more on this item, stay tuned, more to come on it, but sounds like we've had I think we had a great discussion tonight, and I think we got our marching orders, and encourage all of you to keep stay tuned and hold our nose to the grindstone, so to speak, to keep us working on this. I don't think there's any question we have a lot of work to do, but thanks again. And we are going to move on so that we can finish up this meeting. We got one more item on the agenda. Thanks everybody for coming on this one, and thanks again. We'll let Ashley and Mark go. And
yeah, thank you guys.
Good night. So item number 2 on our agenda is a policy matter. Review and action on project development and implementation agreement for Lena Street improvements between Lena Street Commons LLC and the town of Ridgway. And it looks like it's got Bo's name on it. Go ahead, Bo.
Great, thank you, Mayor. I'm happy to take this. This is kind of a continuation of some long-term discussions that the town has had with the developer of Lena Street Commons. In the development agreement, there is an allocation or a cost sharing 60% by Lena Street Commons with respect to paving that certain portion of Lena Street in the town, undertaking 40%. What the goal with the implementation agreement is to basically get started with the schedule that's outlined in the implementation agreement, and then allow for the development team to participate with some of the review of the work as the town progresses. So that was kind of overly broad, but are there any questions with respect to the development, with the implementation agreement?
Sorry, I probably should have called a 5-minute break, but I had to take a bio break myself. Where are we at on this, Bo?
Just as I was indicating, we've already kind of got this relationship that's in place between the town and Lena Street Commons development team as the kind of cost allocation for the development of that portion of Lena Street. This implementation agreement just builds upon that, gives the development team the ability to weigh in as we kind of proceed, and it sets forth the calendar that we're looking at. So.
Great, thank you. Did anybody on council have questions for Bo or staff on this? I think this is.
Mayor, if it's okay, I'll just jump in and maybe add some more info.
Yeah,
It
go
should
ahead.
be in the cover memo if that's helpful, but the aim is for, once, theoretically this agreement is executed, the town will issue a formal request for bids, kick off that process. It's a competitive sealed bid process, very transparent. And the aim would be for you all to consider awarding a contract to the lowest qualified bidder, the bidder whose bid best meets the requirements and criteria within that RFB at your regular April meeting. So just to, I don't know that was made clear in the actual implementation agreement, but that is the aim.
Great, thanks, Preston. I was going to say that's the major reason we're taking this up tonight is so that we can get the bid packet out and hopefully get some bids back as soon as possible, right?
Correct.
So unless anybody, well, let me ask if anybody in the audience has any questions about this. Seeing none. And if council's comfortable with what's been presented, does somebody want to make a motion?
I guess I've got a quick question first, and I just want to
Go ahead.
clarify that the project development and agreement here, this is essentially the same as what we had before, but we just got delayed because the construction group hadn't had ample time to review it before. So it's still essentially the same as what we had before.
Yes, sir. The great question, Bo, correct me if I'm wrong, but it largely mirrors what was put before you at the February 9th meeting. The schedule has just been modified to reflect the time that has passed and to provide for some adequate time to put that RFB out. Yeah, the Lena Street Commons team wanted some additional time to review the bid documents.
That's exactly correct. It was just a update of the scheduling, but there's no substantive change from the draft that was included in the February council packet.
Okay, great. Thank you. Nobody else has any other questions. I'll move to approve the project development implementation agreement for Lena Street improvements.
I'll second that.
Great, motion's made and seconded. If there's no more discussion, I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Beck,
Aye.
Grambly,
Aye.
Lakin,
Aye.
Skylar,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Meyer.
Aye.
Great, thanks, everybody, and thanks, staff. Again, apologies for running out there for a second. Anybody else have anything else? I think we have, no, we don't have any minutes or anything. So unless someone has any other questions or comments or objects, I will declare our meeting adjourned. Thanks, everybody. That was a good meeting.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Well
guys.
done.
Good night.
Thanks.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks again to Preston and Joanne for all the hard work on the water study. That was great.
Indeed.
No, thank you all. Well done tonight. Great meeting.
Okay. Have a good week, everybody.
Everybody.
See you next week.